You are wearing clothes right now. You probably put them on without thinking, and you will probably take them off without thinking. And in between, they will protect you from the cold, the sun, the rain, and the stares of strangers. Clothing is so ordinary that it is almost invisible. But think about what it actually is. Your shirt is a manufactured product. It required raw materials, tools, skilled labor, and a supply chain. Somewhere, fibers were spun into thread, thread was woven into fabric, fabric was cut and sewn. Behind your shirt is an entire industrial history. And that history is far older than you think. It is older than cities, older than farming, older than writing. Clothing was one of the first manufactured products in the history of the world, and the people who made the first durable clothes were solving one of the hardest engineering problems of their age. The hardest part of that problem was not the material, it was the joining. A hide that covers your back but falls off your shoulders is not clothing. It is a blanket. To make clothing, you have to attach pieces together, and every method of attachment, lacing, stitching, weaving, is a technology with its own tools and its own learning curve. The history of clothing is really the history of joining things. The first seam was probably a hole punched in leather with a stone awl and a strip of sinew threaded through it. That single idea, hole and thread, is the ancestor of every button, zipper, and stitch on the planet. How do you turn the body of a dead animal into something you can wear for years? How do you turn plant fibers into string and string into cloth? The answers were discovered, lost, rediscovered, and refined over tens of thousands of years. Let me show you the secret history of clothing. Start at the beginning with the most important raw material of all. Animal skin. Long before anyone wove a thread, humans wore leather. A freshly killed animal is a walking wardrobe. Its hide can be cut to cover the body, and it is warm, waterproof, and tough. But you cannot simply cut a hide off an animal and wear it. Raw hide dries stiff, rots quickly, and smells terrible. It has to be processed. The flesh and fat have to be scraped off the underside. The hair has to be removed or kept deliberately. The hide has to be softened by working it, by treating it with fats and brains, by smoking it. The result is leather, a material so durable that leather objects can survive for thousands of years. How do we know when all of this started? The answer comes from an animal that lives in your clothes today. Body lice? Body lice are a separate species from head lice, and they can only survive in clothing. By comparing the DNA of the two, the geneticist Mark Stoneking and his colleagues showed in 2003 that body lice split from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago. That means permanent clothing is at least that old. Humans were wearing clothes and wearing them constantly before our species was fully anatomically modern. The hide working process itself was a science. After an animal was skinned, the hide had to be scraped clean of flesh and fat, a task that takes hours with a stone scraper. Then came the softening. In many traditional societies, hides were soaked in water, sometimes with tree bark added, to loosen the fibers. They were worked by hand, stretched and rubbed until they became supple. Some traditions used animal brains, rubbed into the hide, a treatment that actually works chemically. Some smoke the hide over a fire which preserved it and made it waterproof. Each step was discovered by trial and error, and the full recipe, scrap, soak, soften, smoke, was a technology as complex as any modern industrial process. Just carried out with hands instead of machines. The tools for this work are ancient. Archaeologists have found stone scrapers with wear patterns that match hide processing, and those scrapers date back more than 200,000 years. Paula Villa, an archaeologist who studied these tools across Europe and Africa, showed that by 200,000 years ago, early humans had a dedicated toolkit for turning animal skins into wearable material. Scrapers for cleaning, awls for punching holes, stone knives for cutting. This was not casual, it was a craft. with a standard set of tools passed down through generations. Once you have leather, you face the next problem. How do you join the pieces together? The earliest method was lacing. You punch holes along the edges of two pieces of hide and thread a strip of leather or sinew through them, like lacing a shoe. This works, but it is clumsy. The lacing loosens, the seams leak, and the garment moves around. What you really need is a needle and thread, and the invention of the needle was one of the great turning points of human technology. The oldest known eyed needles come from a place that keeps appearing in this story. Sibudu Cave in South Africa. In 2008, the archaeologist Lucinda Backwell and her colleagues published an analysis of bone tools from Sibudu, and among them were the oldest known bone awls and eyed needles, dated to about 61,000 years ago. An eyed needle is a needle with a hole at one end, designed to carry thread. To make one, you have to carve a thin, pointed shaft from a piece of bone, then cut a hole through the blunt end without breaking it. Bone is hard and brittle. This is a precision manufacturing task. The eyed needle changed everything. With a needle and thread, you can make fitted clothing. You can sew sleeves that do not restrict your arms, leggings that stay up, seams that do not leak. A draped hide keeps you warm. A sewn garment keeps you warm and lets you run. The difference between the two is the difference between a blanket and a coat, and the eyed needle is what turned blankets into coats. The needles spread around the world. After the Sibudu needles, more eyed needles appear across Eurasia, at sites in Russia, China, and Europe, dating from about 40,000 to 20,000 years ago. Each needle is a small work of precision. The holes had to be carved with a stone point, and the shafts had to be thin enough to pass through leather without tearing it, but strong enough not to break. The fact that the same solution appears across continents independently tells you that the problem, how to sew durable clothing, was universal, and the answer was the same everywhere. You need a needle with an eye. Thread was the other half of the revolution, and it was even older than the needle. At a site in France called Abri du Marais, archaeologists found a fragment of twisted plant fiber, a piece of string, dating to about 52,000 years ago. The team, led by Marie-Étienne Moncel, published the discovery in 2020. The string was made by Neanderthals. It was not a rope, just a thin strand of twisted plant fibers. But the twist was deliberate. Someone had taken plant fibers and rolled them together under tension to make a longer, stronger material. That is the foundation of every textile ever made. Once you can make string, you can make rope. Once you can make rope, you can make nets, bags, slings, and baskets. And once you can make these things, you have entered the world of fiber technology, the world that eventually produced woven cloth. The Neanderthals at Abri du Marais were standing at the beginning of that world, and they got there 52,000 years ago. The Ice Age took fiber technology to the next level. At Holyfels Cave in Germany, a team led by Nicholas Conard found a tool carved from mammoth ivory, dated to about 35,000 years ago, and published the discovery in 2020. The tool is small and elegant, with 4 carefully carved holes. It was designed for one job: twisting plant fibers into rope. You pass the fibers through the holes, twist, and the tool guides them into a uniform, strong cord. It is a dedicated rope-making machine, the oldest known example of specialized manufacturing equipment in human history. Think about what that tool represents. It is not a general-purpose object. It is a specialist instrument built for a single task, and that task is making rope. Someone 35,000 years ago looked at the problem of making cord and designed a better tool for it. That is engineering. That is the same kind of thinking that produces a lathe or a loom. The makers of the Holyfels tool were not just making rope, they were improving the means of making rope. And that is the definition of technology advancing. Now let me take you to the next chapter, which comes from clay. At the Gravesian sites of Pavlov and Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dating to about 26,000 years ago, archaeologists, led by James Adivasio, examined impressions left in lumps of clay. The impressions were made by cordage, netting, and woven textiles. Someone had pressed rope and fabric into wet clay, probably by accident, and the clay preserved the exact structure of the fibers. Adivasio's analysis showed that the people of the Gravescian had mastered cordage and were beginning to produce textiles, structures made by crossing threads. The impressions are the oldest direct evidence of textile-like production in Europe. Fiber was not just for clothing. The same string that sewed garments could become a fishing net, a bag, a sling, or a trap. The archaeology of early fishing is full of net sinkers, stones tied to the bottom of nets found along ancient shorelines. In northern Europe, archaeologists have recovered fragments of nets made from twisted plant fibers, dating back thousands of years. A net is clothing's cousin. It uses the same material, the same twisting technique, and the same skill, but it catches dinner instead of keeping you warm. The fiber revolution did not just dress humanity, it fed it. The string itself was a kind of universal connector. With string, you can carry fire, tie a shelter together, hang meat out of reach of predators, and bind a bundle of arrows. Every use of string is a small piece of the same technology, and the more you look, the more of human life it touches. The fiber revolution was not a single invention. It was a new material that enabled 1,000 others. Basketry is the older sibling of weaving, and it may be older than any of it. Baskets are made by crossing and interlocking plant fibers, the same structural principle as woven cloth, just stiffer. The oldest evidence of basketry from sites in the Americas and elsewhere reaches back tens of thousands of years. A basket is a container. A mat is a basket laid flat. A piece of cloth is a mat made of thread. The progression from basket to mat to cloth is one continuous line of invention, and it runs through every culture on Earth. The people who wove the first cloth were standing on 10,000 years of their ancestors weaving baskets. Now here is the part that brings it all together. Meet Sid. Fortzi, the Iceman, is a man who died in the Alps about 5,300 years ago and was preserved, frozen, and mummified in a glacier. He was discovered in 1991, wearing his clothes, and his wardrobe is a complete catalogue of ancient garment technology. Futsi wore a coat and leggings made of tanned leather, pieced together with careful seams. He wore a cap made of bearskin, with the fur still on. He wore shoes with grass padding inside for insulation, and over everything he wore a cloak woven from grass, a rain cape that shed water and could be replaced cheaply. Cincy's outfit tells you that by the Copper Age, humans had a mature, multi-material clothing industry. Leather for durability, fur for warmth, woven plant fiber for waterproofing. Each material had a job, and the garments were made by skilled craft workers who knew how to cut, sew, and finish them. Fancy was not royalty. He was probably a traveler, and he was dressed like a professional. The clothing technology that started with a scraped hide and a bone needle had, after 60,000 years, become a complete system. There is one more thread in this story, and it connects clothing to the deepest question of why humans wear anything at all. The archaeologist Mark Collard and his colleagues published a study in 2015 comparing the stone toolkits of Neanderthals and early modern humans. And they found evidence that Neanderthals were making fitted clothing, not just draped hides. Their scrapers were specialized for hide processing. Collard's analysis suggested that Neanderthals had the technology for tailored garments, which would have been essential for surviving Ice Age winters in Europe. Clothing, in other words, was not a luxury that came late to human history. It was a survival technology that was already mature tens of thousands of years ago, shared across human species, refined over the eons. The same technology that kept you warm this morning kept a Neanderthal warm in an Ice Age winter. The The same logic that produces your raincoat produced Fincy S. grass cape. The climate connection is the reason clothing technology advanced so fast. The last ice age, which reached its peak about 20,000 years ago, was a forcing function. In Northern Europe and Asia, winter temperatures could fall to -20 degrees or lower, and a person without proper clothing froze to death. The groups that survived the Ice Age were the groups with the best garments. Natural selection was, quite literally, selecting for seamstresses. The eyed needle, the fitted garment, the layered outfit. These were not conveniences. They were survival equipment, as essential as a spear. The archaeological timing supports this. The explosion of needle and clothing evidence coincides with the coldest periods of the Ice Age. With farming came new fabrics. The first plant fiber to be domesticated for cloth was flax, and Neolithic farmers in the Near East were growing it and weaving linen thousands of years before the pyramids. Flax fibers are long, strong, and fine, and linen garments survive in the archaeological record from very early farming sites. Cotton was domesticated independently in India and in the Americas, and wool came later after humans learned to manage sheep and harvest their fleece. Each new fabric was a revolution. Leather is warm but stiff. Linen is light but creases. Wool is warm and elastic. Cotton is soft and breathable. The modern wardrobe is a museum of all these revolutions, one fabric layered on another. Color came next. The earliest dyes were plants, roots, and minerals. Woad and indigo produced blues. Madder root produced reds. Oak galls and iron produced black. The chemistry of dyeing, mordants that bind color to fiber, was discovered by experiment, and dyed textiles appear in the archaeological record from the Neolithic onward. A colored garment was a status symbol because the dye took time, skill, and materials. The person wearing blue was telling everyone they could afford the extra step. The fashion industry, with its seasons and its signals, is not a modern invention. It is an old human habit, wearing your status on your sleeve. Literally. Clothing was never just functional, though. From the very beginning, it carried meaning. The shells, beads, and animal tooth ornaments found at ancient burial sites were attached to clothing, turning garments into messages about status, identity, and belonging. An engraved ostrich eggshell or a string of beads sewn onto a hide said something about the person wearing it. The decorated clothing in the archaeological record is the ancestor of the fashion industry, and it is tens of thousands of years old. Humans did not invent fashion because they were vain. They invented it because clothing, the most visible thing about a person, was the perfect place to put a message. The making of clothes was also one of the first specialized professions. In most traditional societies, the skilled hide workers and seamstresses were women, and the craft was taught from mother to daughter over years. The knowledge which plant fibers twist into strong string, which hides make the softest leather, how to cut a garment so it fits, was passed down with the same care as any other science. The first clothing workshops were not factories. They were family groups, working by firelight, and they produced some of the most durable and well-made objects in the prehistoric world. Consider the supply chain hidden in a single prehistoric garment. Someone had to hunt the animal and skin it. Someone had to scrape the hide and soften it. Someone had to gather plant fibers, twist them into thread, and make or obtain a needle. Someone had to cut the pieces, sew the seams, and finish the edges. That is a chain of at least 6 distinct skills, each one learned over years, and they all had to come together to produce one coat. A prehistoric garment is not a simple thing. It is the product of an economy. If you could travel back and visit a prehistoric workshop, the most surprising thing might be how organized it was. The tools are distinctive and recognizable. Hide scrapers, bone awls, eyed needles, stone knives, and later, spindle hauls for spinning thread. Archaeologists can identify a work area for textile production by the scatter of these tools, the same way you would recognize a sewing room by its needles and thread, the division of labor, the toolkits, the raw material supply. All of it existed tens of thousands of years ago. The clothing industry is one of the oldest industries on Earth, and it is still with us. Think about your own wardrobe. The factories that make modern clothes are vastly more efficient than a prehistoric hide worker, but the logic is the same. Raw materials in processing steps, skilled labor, assembly, finished product. The t-shirt you are wearing went through spinning, weaving, cutting, and sewing, exactly like a prehistoric garment went through scraping, softening, cutting, and stitching. The scale changed. The chain did not. There is a humbling thought hidden here. The modern clothing industry produces billions of garments a year, and most of them are worn for a season and discarded. A prehistoric garment, by contrast, was mended, patched, and reused until it fell apart, and then the material was recycled into something else. Footsie's clothes show signs of repair. The durability that our ancestors built into their clothing out of necessity is something the modern world is trying to relearn. Stitch by stitch, in the face of mountains of textile waste, the first makers of durable clothing understood something we are only remembering: a garment should last. So the next time you put on a jacket, take a second look at it. Behind that jacket is a chain of invention that runs back more than 60,000 years. The scraped hide, the punched hole, the bone needle, the twisted fiber, the ivory rope tool, the woven cloth, the sewn seam, all of it is inside the thing you are wearing. You are not just putting on clothes, you are putting on the accumulated engineering of your entire species. Your jacket is a time machine, and it fits. You are wearing 60,000 years of engineering.